system is very, very anti-poor and very, very anti-black.
I think white people need to, A, take an L and say, okay, we screwed up and we can't always be the father figure.
Success for a white kid is not like a great victory. Success for a white kid is destined.
It's not so much about engaging in conversation, it's more about listening.
If you're uncomfortable with me being a black person, then yeah, you know you're in the wrong country.
I don't believe in the Rainbow Nation. The Rainbow Nation to me is a fallacy because it does not exist.
It features South African influences amongst popular names such as Skhothane fashion maven, Material Don Dada, controversial dancer Zodwa Wabantu, and actress Thalitha Ndima. That's the third installment of The People Versus. Now, this trilogy premiered back in 2016 with The People Versus the Rainbow Nation, followed by The People Versus Patriarchy, and now The People Versus the People. The third installment zooms in on issues such as black love, self-worth, capitalism, and mental health, amongst others. To tell us more, we are joined by, in our Durban studios, by Carol Kaiko, who's the producer of this documentary. And with us here in Johannesburg is Lebogang Rasethaba, the director of People Versus the People. It's great to have you both here in studio, but Lebo, since you're closer, I'll start with you. Take us back to the concept of the People Versus.
Yeah, so I think it's always about antagonisms and sort of interrogating those antagonisms and things that antagonize us like on a daily basis. So it's all about, like, I guess, the smaller struggles to the bigger struggles. So I guess what people would call microaggressions versus macroaggressions. And the journey has been to look at the different ways in which these antagonisms affect people, young black people, and doing a cross-section of kind of the country and kind of checking the pulse of how young people feel about. So Rainbow Nation was about structural powers, it was about race, it was about class. Of course, patriarchy, the people versus patriarchy, that's self-explanatory. And now The People Versus the People was just more interrogating how maybe the absence of black love is something that is getting in our way. And when I talk about that, I'm speaking specifically about internalized oppressions. So living in a system, in a world where there's a lot of antagonisms, again, the versus.
And just as you're saying, the people versus the people, I look at what's happening at the moment in Lenasia, where we've got these mushrooming of shacks and people in bonded housing, and it's people versus the people in the literal sense, throwing stones at each other for issues that our government is probably not taking enough accountability on.
Right. So then again, you question what's actually really happening there, and you have to go, a step, like, and it's interesting that you bring it up. You go a step further, and you're like, these people aren't actually against each other. There's something else that they're fighting.
Yeah.
And what is that thing that they're fighting?
Sure. Carol, I want to speak to you about how the first two documentaries were received. Just looking at the feedback from the viewers on MTV, or just people on the streets, or people on social media, giving their reaction and their thoughts.
I think what's really interesting about the series in total, just looking at all three documentaries and not just the first two, is the fact that each time they've been produced, there's been such a huge response, especially on social media, which for us says that these are conversations that need to happen, and there are no spaces where these conversations are happening. So young people have a lot that they think about what's happening in our society. They have a lot to say about the issues that are happening, other than just waiting for their leaders to say it for them. And so for us, even with doing this film, we were trying to find a place to almost land the three conversations, because Rainbow Nation was very heavy, and so was patriarchy. And so for us, we wanted to find a place that, now that we've dealt with those two, what are we going to do next? How do we start to talk about where we go from here? And for us, what's really interesting with talking about black love is trying to unravel all the things that we've sort of taken upon ourselves to survive. Because we live, even when you're talking about the Lenasia incident, it's people trying to find a way to survive in an environment that isn't so survivable for them. And so if we go back and say, okay, what about if we consider black love and take away all of those things and look at who we are as black people, and if we can find a way to resolve the issues in our communities just from our identity.
And Carol, why is it so important for us to have these conversations? I mean, what does talking about it achieve?
So one of the chapters in the documentary is about mental health, and in many ways when we started working on this documentary, we were kind of trying to find a way to have the conversation about mental health, because we know what it's done to our societies, and particularly Black societies, and it's still taboo to talk about mental health. And so for us, we want people to be able to talk about what they're going through, so that we can embrace those situations and not feel like we're stigmatizing some people, because the moment you understand where people come from, you can kind of understand their struggles and what's brought up the situations that's happening. But if you immediately start to address the issue without looking at the symptoms or what actually the root cause is, it doesn't really solve the problem. You're just like dealing with it just for a moment before it starts up again somewhere further down the line. You're kicking the can down the road. And so for us, it's important that we understand the generation that exists now, it's not enough to just give them solutions and say, go do. They want to sit down and reason and talk about solutions that will last, and talk about, this is how I feel about it, and I want to know how you feel about how I feel about it. So it's important to create spaces where there's healthy dialogue, and then solutions can come from that, because otherwise I don't know where the solutions are coming from.
And I see you nodding, Lebo. I just want to get your reflections on that. Do these conversations help bring about those solutions? Do they help us become more conscious of the world around us, and not just the world around us, but of our own prejudices, of our own privilege, of our own standing in society? Does talking about it really get individuals to take a closer look and to antagonize even deeper than the surface?
Yeah, I mean, so I think at the core of this conversation, at the core of Black love, and the practice of Black love is about healing, right? So that's what this entire conversation is really about. It's about how do we heal. So when Carol's talking about conditions of surviving, etc., essentially what we're talking about is healing. And we also know that talking is a form of therapy. So I think just even before we get to the place where we're looking for solutions, it's about understanding that talking about stuff, any family knows that when you go through a death, when you go through any sort of trauma, a therapist will always tell you, talk.
Yeah.
And I think if you think about talking as a form of healing, then it becomes a lot more interesting. I think maybe right now, again, in people's different pursuits of like dignity and humanity, I think talking has become something that feels quite aggressive, quite violent, because in these like woke social media times, etc., people want to assert themselves. But I think there is something quite beautiful and therapeutic about talking, because it's just about essentially it's a way of connecting. So I think that I think talking creates conditions for Black love and healing to exist. So I think it's important in that context.
And for you, what have been the highlights of working on this project? And I just specifically want to draw on some of the lessons that came out for you.
So I think healing, I think, and understanding, again, different ways in which people heal and have been healing, and not to think about it as something sort of like obscure, some like theory that exists in the mountains. It's something that's very like close, and it's like an everyday practice of just like empathy and compassion. And I think to understand film as a medium, like making this film, for me as a filmmaker in itself was like a form of healing. And I think it was also important for people to watch it, to understand the process of watching the film as a form of healing. So it's just about different ways in which you can exercise Black love and healing, I think, is kind of at the core of the conversation.
All right, Lebo and Carol, that's where we'll have to leave it. Unfortunately, there could never be enough time. Lebogang Rasethaba, who is the director of a new documentary titled The People versus the People. And with him was, of course, Carol, who is in our Durban studios. And they're just talking about the importance of having these conversations and really just antagonizing and interrogating all sorts of subjects that do affect us. It is time for us to take a quick break. Do stay with us.